Hi guys, thanks for joining us today. My name is Connor Brady from Dogs First, and today's webinar is about who are AAFCO and what's this about complete pet food. Everything you want to know about me is on my website, dogsfirst.ie. You can email me anytime at info@dogsfirst.ie should you have any questions from what you hear today. And as always, you can check me out on Facebook, where else, for a daily chatter. Please come join us there. You get the good stuff, the funny stuff, and the often quite weird stuff that I like to ponder now and again. Okay, issues with AAFCO and complete pet food. I've divided it into 4 sections, as I seem to do a lot. First section is an introduction to AAFCO and pet food regulation. And the second section is issues with the AAFCO feed guidelines that all pet foods seem to say they adhere to. And the third section will be how well are they adhering to it. And the fourth section is solutions. Nothing worse than people coming up with problems and not offering any of those. Okay, let's get straight into it. Introduction to AAFCO. This is the UK's #1 pet food by sales volume, Baker's Pet Food, made by Nestle Purina on this side of the pond. Very, very popular product, supermarket product, and I'm sure it has its equivalent in the US, no doubt. And on the front of the box there, you can see 100% complete and balanced. 100%. This product is absolutely perfect. Quite a statement. I doubt you would see that on the front of a human product anywhere. And in defense of that statement, they say Baker's Meaty Meals Small Dog is formulated to meet the nutritional levels established by the AAFCO dog food nutrient profiles for maintenance. Well, that sounds very encouraging. So who are AAFCO? What are these dog food nutrient profiles? Well, let's take a look. Who are AAFCO, or the AAFCO? AAFCO stands for the Association of American Feed Control Officials. But before we get into that, just a little bit of background. It's an American group. Before we get into that, a little bit about US pet food regulation. Pet food oversight in the US was conducted by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, who oversee all the food and drug stuff for humans and for pets, although largely for humans. You can think of the FDA as the police, okay? When something goes wrong, the FDA will investigate, and they do, okay? But the actual regulation and oversight of pet food manufacturing and quality and control, that's not the FDA's concern. They are just making sure that there isn't any issues. They have some rules that they have, like, you can't use any parts of diseased animals in your food product, but of course, pet food uses, in the US, pet foods can use 4D animals, dead, diseased, dying, disabled, in their rendering mix, which makes the meat meal that goes into pet food. So it's a little bit blurry, but anyway, it was something. And then in the 1970s, we saw the first kind of movement of the pet food into the upper echelons of government policy. Earl Butz, who was the chair of the Ralston Purina board, a big pet food company, and Clifford Harden, who's the secretary of the US Department of Agriculture, just effectively swapped jobs. That was a piece done by the New York Times, Pet Food Aesthetics, a Human Concern. A little bit of a worrying read that. It's been 40 years ago, and they've done a number of pieces since on it, and all equally a little concerning, really. Anyway, later in the 1970s, dilated cardiomyopathy started killing tens of thousands of pets in the US. And I don't use the figure lightly, largely cats, also dogs. And what they found was that pet food companies essentially stopped including taurine in their foods. They'd essentially stopped using meat in their foods because taurine, as you can guess by the name, comes from bull. It's an amino acid that's most found in beef. And if you were putting meat in your products, you wouldn't have a taurine deficiency. So meat had hit the floor, and it was just all cereal and plant food. Not unlike most of the stuff out today. And the FDA was forced to investigate because owners were saying, this isn't fair. Our pets are dead and all. And so the FDA tasked the NRC, the Nutrient Research Council, one of their subdivisions. And they said, guys, you need to form a subcommittee on dog nutrition, and you need to produce the world's first pet food guidelines. This was a good thing, good idea, because they brought out these guidelines that pet food companies had to adhere to, which got pet food up off the floor and stopped pets dying as a quick. So that was a good thing. In the 1980s, the FDA came in for a bit of trouble. They had less and less money. The Nutrient Research Council, in particular, desperately underfunded, handed over the reins of pet food regulation, in inverted commas, to the Association of American Feed Control Officials, AAFCO, and the subcommittee on dog nutrition was shut down, sadly. So then we have AAFCO in charge. Well, who are AAFCO? Every kind of review of who AAFCO are will say the same thing. Every non-industry review will say the same thing. But this is a pretty telling little quote from Schulhoff 2016. Reps from Cargill, ADM, Purina, they're the biggest pet food manufacturers. The Pet Food Institute, the primary lobby group for Big Kibble, and both the American Feed Industry Association and the American Grain and Feed Association, two other carbohydrate lobby groups, all sit either as AAFCO committee members or AAFCO industry advisors in inverted commas. So that doesn't read very well. Here's another quote from, this was by Justine Patrick from Harvard Law School. Nice thesis here, but the title kind of gives the game away. Incestuous pet food regulation allows consumers to feed ring dings and Krispy Kremes. That doesn't read well for the industry. And she says, AAFCO official publications list a group of members charged with developing and reviewing standards for terms found on pet food labels. Of the group's 6 members, 4 were pet food company employees. That's not good because, you know, labels are everything really. That's why you're picking up the product. You're trusting what's written on the label is kosher, you know, aren't we? And so that they regulate their own labeling probably explains why we have such nonsense as prescription diets. You know, prescription, it has 0 medicinal qualities whatsoever. This is why newsagents can sell this product. If it was prescription, they couldn't. So it's just a gimmick to make you buy it. You'd never be allowed to do that in human worlds. But pet food land, everything is upside down and topsy-turvy. You can kind of say what you want when you make the rules. And in a similar way, I like to point out that this bone meal product that we spread in our gardens is white, grainy bone meal. And bone meal is called meat and bone meal by the pet food industry. Gardeners call it bone meal. They call it meat and bone meal, pet food industry. And then they just dropped the bone bit because that doesn't sound as good. So then they started calling it meat meal. And recently, if you can believe it, they changed the rules again because they said we must protect consumers. People are saying meat meal is not a good product. And so we must protect them. So we're going to change the name of meat meal. And now you can say dried or dehydrated meat, which I think we all agree sounds much tastier. I mean, that does really make you think that's meat. When in actual fact, all this comes from a rendering plant. It doesn't make different types of bone, meat and bone meal. It's just stewed up animal waste. The fat floats to the top for your jellies and soap, and the white goo at the bottom is largely bone because that's, they don't make money sending meat muscle to the rendering vat, and they scrape that bony material gloop out of the bottom and they dry it to this white bone meal, and that's what they sell to pet food companies who call it dehydrated meat. So that is a little quite telling. Okay. Also, you can see here on the box, it says with beef, you know, with meat. So with beef means it has to have 3 to 4% bone meal in it. And they can say beef. So now you've got the brown color in the pet food and beef on the front of it. And lots of people you can just put pictures of steaks. You can do whatever you want. And you go, oh yeah, this is a beefy kibble. Well, it could have 4% cow bone in it. If that's beef to you, yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Okay, so that's a little bit of background, a little bit negative perhaps, but that's just the truth of it. Here are the facts on it. AAFCO. As a non-governmental agency, AAFCO cannot make laws, okay? They don't make any laws. As such, they have 0 regulatory or punitive powers whatsoever. They can't give out to you if you don't do things right. They cannot approve or ban products. This isn't good. They have no laboratories and no investigators. So they don't even make investigations. Their role is purely advisory. Okay, so it's an advisory group that is populated heavily by pet food company employees. So this would be a worrying level of regulation, you'd have to admit. What AAFCO have given us, they've given us 2 things to go by. If you want to be a pet food, a complete pet food, you have to do one of 2 things according to AAFCO's guidelines. You have to conduct feed trials or adhere to their nutrient guidelines. So the feed trials, this is what their feed trials are. We're not going to spend much more time on the feed trials than this slide. But to give you an example of their very strenuous demands, tests conducted in-house by the manufacturers themselves and not independently verified. So nobody looks at the tests or the results or anything, just people that make the product and make money from selling the product did this test apparently and came up with these results apparently, and then they have the results on file somewhere if you want to see them, but nobody checks. Good start. Tests include 8 caged dogs for 6 months. Ooh, that's not a very big figure, is it? For puppy food, the tests only have to run for 10 weeks. So 8 caged dogs for 6 months for lifetime feeding. And the puppy food only has to be tested for 10 weeks for the first year of their life. They're going to be eating that product. 6 out of 8 dogs must not show signs of nutritional deficiency or excess in that time, which is a very, very large range of things that don't need to be included for that, but we just don't have time for it now at the moment. And 2 dogs can be removed for non-nutritional reasons. So only 6 dogs have to make it to the end of the trial. Okay, no animals can lose more than 15% of its starting weight. Why would you be losing 15%? Imagine losing 15% of your starting weight in 6 months. That would be fantastic if we could. But I mean, you could lose 14% of your starting weight and be okay, according to AAFCO. And at the end of this very rigorous trial, 4 blood values are taken from the dog. Hemoglobin, packed cell volume, that's your blood, packed cell volume, a very token measure of fitness, and then a couple of measures of your kidney functions, and make sure that your kidneys aren't, screaming. And from those 4 blood values, then you get the seal of approval. There's no stress test. There's no, measure of anything. It doesn't, no diseases can pop up in that time. Joints can't, there's no measure of behavior. There's no measure of virtually anything useful you could possibly think of is not measured. 4 blood values are taken, and then they get, that's good for life. Okay. And they are allowed to repeat these little trials infinite times. So they can have 10 groups of these 8 dogs if they like. So that's a classic trick done by Big Pharma, where they run many, many trials and they find the most positive results, and then they publish that one, and then they just dump the rest. So pet food companies don't have to keep their failure data. They just dump it. So it's like me flipping a coin 100 times and then just picking the slot of 10 where heads came up 8 times and tails only came up twice, which is going to happen. It doesn't come up heads, tails over 100. So that is classic Big Pharma nonsense. So that's unfortunately used with gusto here in the pet food industry. And then production begins. That's the AAFCO feed trials. Guys, if you think the nutrient guidelines are going to be better than that, you are in for a nasty surprise. Most companies don't do feed trials now. They say, because you can say this product is virtually identical to this other product that we make, and we already did a feed trial for that, so we don't need to do it for this one. That's okay by AAFCO. So the feed trials aren't done, more natural companies don't like to be seen to be doing feed trials. Doesn't sound good, dogs in cages and all that. And raw dog food companies, I don't know of any that have done a feed trial, bar Honey's Pet Food, which we'll talk later, which was done in-home with their client dogs. Okay. This is what we're going to be talking about today, the AAFCO feed guidelines. This every pet food company and product pretends to adhere to. And these are the AAFCO feed guidelines as we're seeing. So we're going to delve into that today. Okay,